You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Law and Disorder, where we dive into the world of true crime stories with memorable cases that have lasting effects for law enforcement. Let's hear from Anna Muckenfuss, our Manager of Programs and Education Initiatives, who brings us The Disappearance of Natalee Holloway, a story of resilience.
For youth around the world, and especially in the United States, high school graduation is really the first true step that one can take to prove they're leaving their childhood behind for the adult world. For some, high school graduation leads to further education. For others, a path into skilled trade in the general workforce. No matter the path that the graduate intends to take, it is a step of celebration. It's a recognition of their development of the necessary life skills and knowledge that will allow this individual to hopefully become a successful adult. It's a way to start the rest of their lives on the right foot. For some, that celebration expands beyond the moment that they collect their diploma. Families or even classmates find this momentous occasion to be a good reason to take a vacation, to explore the world one last time before embarking on the adventure of adulthood. And occasionally, what begins as a grand celebration and adventure can turn into a family's worst nightmare. Today's case is exactly that. This is Law and Disorder, and today we are going to be discussing the 2005 disappearance of recent high school graduate Natalee Holloway, a case that continues to haunt American families and law enforcement. We will discuss the intricacies of the case, but also the struggle to find justice in foreign jurisdictions. In Holloway's case, her family is desperately trying to navigate the justice system in Aruba. We will also look at the question of how can American law enforcement help families who find themselves in similar situations to that Natalee's family faced back in 2005 and continue to face today. So let's start with where this story truly begins. So it's May 30th, 2005. A group of 125 students and 5 chaperones from Mountain Brook High School are at the end of their 5-day adventure on the island of Aruba. This is an unofficial celebration of the students' recent graduation. This trip has been one of their first real tastes of adult life. In Aruba, there's a lower drinking age than in the United States, and it's an atmosphere that encourages late nights and club atmospheres. While there are chaperones present, they weren't really there to monitor the students' every move like they would if it were a school trip. These students had just graduated, so technically they were adults. These chaperones were mostly just there to help these newly minted young adults to navigate what for many would have been their first international trip. And the presence of familiar adults was a comfort to parents already struggling to grasp this new reality that their children really aren't children anymore. But with 5 days of excitement behind them, their bags are packed, rooms double-checked for left belongings, and now they're headed to the airport for the trip home. But something, or more like someone, is missing. One of the students, a girl named Natalee Holloway, is nowhere to be found. Chaperones are alerted and go to check her hotel room, suspecting maybe she overslept. They were out late anyway, so it's very likely possibility. But she's not there, and her passport and luggage remain untouched. Everyone begins to mentally retrace their steps from the night before. Who had been out with Natalee that night? Had they seen her with anyone, from the group or otherwise? Did she even make it back to the hotel at all? Local law enforcement officials are called, and so are Natalee's parents. Her mother, Beth, and stepfather, George Jug Twitty, immediately fly to the island with a group of friends to start searching for their missing daughter. Her friends are questioned, and an initial wave of searches on the island are initiated. Both Aruban officials and Natalee's parents begin to ask questions of her classmates. They learn from their questioning that Natalee was last seen around 1:30 a.m. on the day of her disappearance. A group of the graduates traveling together had been to one of the nightclubs near the hotel, called Carlos and Charlie's. There were other patrons of the nightclub around the student's age, and Natalee was last seen leaving with three of them: a 17-year-old Dutch honors student studying at the Aruban International School named Joran Vandersloot, and two of his friends, who happened to be Surinese brothers, 21-year-old Deepak and 18-year-old Satish Kalpo. They drove off from the nightclub in a car that belonged to the eldest Kalpo brother. Holloway's classmates assumed they were just giving her a ride back to her hotel. The students were staying at a Holiday Inn on the island, and it wasn't until Natalee missed her flight and her belongings were found abandoned that they thought anything suspicious about her departure from Carlos and Charlie's. And why would they worry? Aruba was a vacation destination known for its nightlife, especially among younger adults, such as the group of travelers Natalee was with. And for all accounts and purposes, Natalee was a responsible, trustworthy, all American girl. She had recently graduated with honors from Mountain Brook High School, located in an affluent suburb of Birmingham, Alabama, where she had been active in extracurriculars, especially National Honor Society and the school dance team. And she did it all while maintaining excellent grades. She was planning to attend the University of Alabama in the fall with a full scholarship. Her intention was to study on a pre-med track and become a doctor. It was her high ambition that made her disappearance even more shocking. When Beth and Jug Twitty arrived to Aruba, there was nothing that could stop them from finding their daughter. Within 4 hours of landing on the island, they provided Aruban officials with the address of one of the individuals with whom Natalee had last been seen, the Dutch student, Joran Vandersloot. When asked where she received the name and address, she replied that it had been a night manager at the Holiday Inn, the hotel where Natalee and her classmates had been staying during their trip. The night manager had viewed security footage from the time of Natalee's disappearance and recognized Vandersloot on the footage. That was enough of a lead for investigators to accompany the Twitties to Vandersloot's residence to look for Natalee and ask a few questions. He initially denied knowing Natalee, saying he didn't recognize her name. But then, as he continued talking, he told a story where she was present in the house, and information given to investigators by his friend Deepak Kalpo corroborated it. By the end of their questioning, Vandersloot told the investigators that he and his friends had driven Holloway but to the California lighthouse area of Arashi Beach because she wanted to see the sharks. They later dropped Holloway off at her hotel around 2 a.m. According to Vandersloot, Holloway fell as she exited the car but refused his help. He then stated that as he and Kalpo were driving away, Holloway was approached by a dark man in a black shirt, similar to those that are worn by security guards. Mass search efforts are taking place to look for Natalee. Hundreds of volunteers from both the island of Aruba and the United States joined in on this effort during the first days of the search. Meanwhile, mass search efforts are continuing to take place on the island. Hundreds of volunteers from both the island of Aruba and the United States joined in the effort to find Natalee during those first days of the search. The Aruban government even gave thousands of civil servants the day off to participate in this rescue effort. Dutch Marines searched the island's shoreline, and Aruban banks raised $20,000 to provide support and aid to volunteer search teams. Investigators continued to search for evidence of a struggle, including in Kalpo's car, where they did find some kind of liquid that looked like blood, but once it was tested, was determined not to be blood. And they tried to locate Natalee on hotel surveillance cameras on the night that she disappeared. All turned up nothing. At this time, U.S. law enforcement also became involved in the case. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice reported to the press that U.S. and Aruban officials were constantly in contact, and the State Department was supplying resources to Aruban investigators to ensure that they had everything they needed to bring Natalee safely home. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice reported to the press that U.S. and Aruban officials were in constant contact about the case, and the State Department was supplying resources to Aruban investigators to ensure that they had all they needed to bring Natalee safely home. But it's now nearly been a week. Natalee Holloway still is missing, and we haven't found a trace of her along the entire island. But investigators believe they have a suspect, or suspects. And on June 5th, Aruban officials detained Nick John and Abraham Jones, a pair of former security guards at the Allegro Hotel, which at the time of Natalee's disappearance was closed for renovations. The exact reasons for their arrest were never made public by authorities, but it's believed that statements from Vandersloot and the Calpo brothers raised suspicion towards them, especially since the two former guards were known to be cruising hotels to pick up women, and at least one of them had had a prior incident with law enforcement. But after their questioning failed to prove their connection to Holloway's disappearance, they were released without charges on June 13th. But on July 9th, what could possibly be the biggest break in the case at this point occurs. Officials arrest Yaron Vandersloot and the Calpo brothers on the suspicion that they had been kidnapped and murdered by Natalee Holloway. But how could they do that? There wasn't any blood found in the car or in her hotel room, and they definitely haven't found a body. This is a good time to remind you that this didn't occur in an American jurisdiction. Natalee Holloway disappeared in a foreign country. So there's a different justice system with different laws and different methods of policing. If something occurred, it's going to be prosecuted in that country's justice system rather than the American justice system. So US law enforcement can act kind of as a liaison between these agencies and American families, but American families that are in this kind of situation end up being at the mercy of that foreign justice system. So Aruban laws allow investigators to do different things than the American justice system does. Aruban law allows for investigators to make an arrest based on serious suspicion, something that doesn't happen in the United States. And we actually have laws that protect us from being arrested just for the suspicion of a crime. In order for Aruban officials to continue holding a suspect in custody, however, an increasing evidential burden must be met at periodic reviews. So, in the case of Vandersloot and the Calpo brothers, the biggest increase in evidential burden that they could have is finding Natalee's body, something that hasn't happened yet. And at the time of their arrest, investigators stated that the focus of the investigation had centered around these three suspects from the get go. Officials had been maintaining close observation of the three men, and that observation began 3 days after Holloway was reported missing. The investigation included surveillance with telephone wiretaps and even monitoring of these individuals' emails. Investigators indicated that pressure from Holloway's family caused the police to prematurely stop their surveillance and detain the three suspects. And it was after these arrests that the drama with the media really began to take a turn. On June 17th, Steve Gregory Crows was also arrested. Lead investigators say that Crows was detained based on information from one of the three detainees. And then on June 22nd, Aruban police detained Vandersloot's own father, Paulus Vandersloot, for questioning. He was arrested that same day. But both Paulus Vandersloot and Crows were ordered to be released on June 26th. At this point, the original three detainees are beginning to change their stories. At the beginning, all three indicated that Vandersloot and Holloway were dropped off at the Marriott Hotel Beach near the fishermen's huts. Vandersloot stated he did not harm Holloway, but did leave her on the beach. Vandersloot then called Deepak Kalpo, the older brother, to tell him that he was walking home and then sent him a text message 40 minutes later. And at some point in the interrogation, Vandersloot detailed a third account that he was dropped off at home and Holloway was driven off by the Calpo brothers, presumably back to her hotel. The constant circle of pointing fingers and changing stories leads investigators nowhere, and Natalee is still nowhere to be found. On Monday, July 4th, the Calpo brothers are released from custody, but Vandersloot is held for an additional 60 days. The same day of the Calpo brothers' release, the Royal Netherlands Air Force deployed 3 F-16 aircraft equipped with infrared sensors to aid in the search, but the results came up empty. Searches continued after a tip from a local gardener led law enforcement to a small pond near the Aruba Racquet Club, close to the Marriott Beach Hotel. The gardener claimed to have seen Vandersloot attempting to hide his face as he drove to the racquet club with the Calpo brothers on the very early morning of May 30th, between 2:30 and 3 a.m. The pond was partially drained from July 27th to the 30th, hoping that something would be at the bottom, but again, nothing was found. Another tip claimed that someone may have seen three men burying a blonde woman in a landfill that police had already searched once since Natalie's disappearance. The tip would lead investigators to search the same landfill three more times to no avail. Even agents from the FBI came to the island to assist with the search. They brought cadaver dogs and even brought the cadaver dogs to that landfill, hoping to expedite the search there, but their efforts were fruitless. Natalie's family, desperate to find their daughter, begins to raise the amount of their cash offer for information that would lead to their daughter's safe return. The initial offer of $175,000 to bring Natalee home safe was raised to $1 million dollars in the event of her return. And then a reward of $100,000 that for any information that would lead to her remains was increased to $250,000. Aruban investigators continue to toil away, looking for clues, questioning Vandersloot, and collaborating with American law enforcement. The FBI announced that Aruban authorities had provided them with documents, suspect interviews, and other evidence to utilize their assistance in the investigation. Investigators had found a piece of duct tape with strands of blonde hair attached to it, and the samples were tested at a Dutch lab. They believe these samples may have belonged to Holloway, but the tests came back inconclusive. A group of Aruban police and members of the prosecutor's office then traveled to the FBI Central Laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. They wanted to consult with American investigators about their techniques for testing the hair samples. The hair samples were tested a second time at Quantico, and the FBI announced that the samples did not belong to Holloway. With this lack of new evidence and still no sign of Natalee, Juran Vandersloot was released from custody on September 3rd, 2005. However, he was released with the condition that he remain available to the police as the investigation into Natalee's whereabouts was still active. But that restriction was removed 11 days later. But this was not the last time anyone would hear from Jaron Vandersloot. In the months following his release, Vandersloot gave several interviews explaining his version of the events. The most notable of these interviews was broadcast on Fox News over 3 nights in March of 2006. In the interview, Vandersloot alleges that Natalee wanted to have sex with him, but he turned her down, and that she wanted to stay at the beach, but he told her no because he had to go to school in the morning. So he had his friend pick him up, and he left Natalee at the beach around 3 a.m. Vandersloot also stated that he was somewhat ashamed to have left a young woman alone at the beach, albeit by her own request. He said he was not truthful about it when police first asked him about the situation because he was convinced that Holloway would soon turn up and all of this would just blow away. Natalee has now been missing for nearly 9 months. In January of 2006, assisted by the FBI, Aruban officials interviewed and re interviewed many of Natalee's classmates from Alabama who had been with her on the trip. Information led the investigators to some sand dunes on the Marriott Hotel beach, and the dunes were investigated on January 17th. But yet again, the search led nowhere. It was beginning to feel almost like Natalee had vanished into thin air. Around the same time, the head investigator of the case, Gerald Dompig, claimed in an interview with CBS News that he did not believe that Natalee had been murdered at all, but rather she had died of alcohol or drug overdose and someone had hidden her body. Dompig even indicated that there was evidence that pointed to possession, though not necessarily use, of illicit drugs by Holloway. While her family continues to deny that Natalee used drugs, there is some merit to Dompig's theory of alcohol or drug poisoning. She was in a foreign country with a low drinking age and an atmosphere of parties and wild nightlife, especially for an 18-year-old girl. It would be really easy to be swept up in the excitement and overindulge, but it would also make it far easier for her to become the unsuspecting victim if someone wanted to slip something into a cocktail. She probably had never had that cocktail before, so how would she know if the drug made it taste differently? And with no body, there's no way to know if she died of alcohol or drug poisoning or if she was murdered. You can't perform an autopsy without a body. And without a body, we really can't even confirm that she's dead. The investigation was really taking a toll on everyone involved. Investigators felt jaded, searching the same spots on the island over and over again. The Aruban government had spent over $3 million on the investigation, which at the time amounted to nearly 40% of the country's police operational budget. And Natalee's family doesn't know whether to have hope or to allow themselves to grieve. On April 11th, 2006, her father published a book titled Aruba: The Tragic Untold Story of Natalee Holloway and Corruption in Paradise, where he recounts in detail his experiences searching for his daughter. Only a few days after Dave Holloway's book is published, there seems to be a turn in the case. Aruban officials arrest Jeffrey van Kromvoort on suspicion of criminal offenses relating to the dealing of narcotics. According to the prosecutor on the case, the offenses might have been related to the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. Van Kromvoort was eventually released on April 24th, and the cases were deemed unrelated. But it sparked a renewed interest in the investigation, now approaching a year from Natalee's initial disappearance. An additional suspect is arrested on May 17th, Guido Wever. Wever is the son of a former Aruban politician. He was detained in the Netherlands on suspicion of assisting in the abduction, battering, and killing of Natalee Holloway. Wever was questioned for 6 days in Utrecht, which is in the Netherlands. And then Aruban prosecutors initially sought his transfer to the island, but he was instead released by an agreement between a prosecutor and his attorney. Feeling the financial blow of this investigation, at Aruba's request, the Netherlands officially took over the investigation of Natalee Holloway's disappearance. After receiving extensive documentation from the case, in September of 2006, a team of Dutch National Police in Rotterdam got to work. Aruban officials officially rejoined the investigation on April 16th of 2007. A combined Aruban-Dutch team began pursuing the investigation on the island at that time. And then there was an explosion. Vandersloot publishes a book. Die Zaak Natalee Holloway, or The Case of Natalee Holloway, is published in Dutch. In this book, Vandersloot gives his perspective on the night that Holloway disappeared and the media frenzy that followed. He admits to and apologizes for his initial untruths, but he maintains his innocence. The book thrusts Vandersloot back into the public eye and, in turn, brings law enforcement's suspicions right back to him. On April 27th, a new search involving approximately 20 investigators was launched at the Vandersloot family residence in Aruba. The investigators even searched through the yard and surrounding areas with shovels and metal rods for any signs that the ground had been disturbed. Investigators never publicized the exact reasons for the search, but they did say that it had nothing to do with Vandersloot's book. When asked for comment on the investigation, Vandersloot's father, Paulus Vandersloot, stated nothing suspicious was found in the house and that all that was seized were diary entries that belonged to him and his wife and his personal computer, which was subsequently returned by the investigators. Remember now that the Dutch have taken over the case, so many comments by investigators as to why searches were happening at the Vandersloot home again were chalked up to making sure that no stone was left unturned in this investigation. In May of the same year, the Kalpo's residence was also searched by authorities who were hoping to gain a better image of the place or circumstances where the offense may have been committed and to understand the chain of events leading to the offense, which was presumed to be the murder or death of Natalee Holloway. On November 21st of 2007, Joran Vandersloot and the Kalpo brothers were once again arrested, but this time on suspicion of a slightly different charge. Rather than being arrested on the suspicion of murder, now they were being arrested on the suspicion of manslaughter, causing serious bodily harm that resulted in the death of Natalee Holloway. After the arrest, Dave Holloway calls for a new search for his daughter that probed the sea beyond the original 330-foot or 100-meter depths in which earlier searches had taken place. That search involved a vessel called the Persistence. A fitting name, as searches for Natalie's body have now persisted for over 2 years. And this search was abandoned due to lack of funds at the end of February of 2008, when nothing of significance was found. On November 30th, a judge ordered that the Calpo brothers be released. Despite attempts by the prosecution to extend their detention, they were released the following day from a lack of evidence. The prosecution appealed their release, which was denied on December 5th, with the court writing, notwithstanding expensive and lengthy investigations on her disappearance on people that could be involved, the file against the suspect does not contain any direct implications that Natalee passed away due to a violent crime. And because of this, Vandersloot was also released without charges on December 7th due to the lack of evidence implicating him and the lack of evidence that Holloway died as the result of a violent crime. The prosecution indicated it would not appeal this release, and on December 18th, prosecutor Hans Moos officially declared the case of Natalee Holloway closed and that no charges would be filed due to the lack of evidence. But it's kind of interesting how the universe creates these interesting ironies or interesting situations, maybe I should say, because on May 30th, 5 years to the day after Holloway's disappearance, a 21-year-old business student named Stephanie Flores Ramirez was reported missing in Lima, Peru. 3 days later, her body was found in a hotel room. That room was registered under the name of Joran Vandersloot. As a result, Vandersloot was arrested in Chile on June 3rd on the murder charge, and he was extradited back to Peru. On June 7th, Peruvian authorities said that Vandersloot confessed to killing Flores. He claimed that he lost his temper when she accessed his laptop without permission and found information linking him to Holloway, and he killed her as a result. Police Chief Cesar Guardia rel- related that Vandersloot told Peruvian police that he knew where Holloway's body was and offered to help Peruvian authorities find it. However, Guardia stated that in the interrogation, it was limited to their case in Peru, so questions about Holloway's disappearance were avoided. But on June 11th, Vandersloot was charged in Lima Superior Court with first-degree murder and robbery. On June 15th, Aruban and Peruvian authorities announced an agreement to cooperate and allow investigators from Aruba to interview Vandersloot at Miguel Castro Prison in Peru. In a September 2010 interview from the prison, Vandersloot reportedly admitted to the extortion plot, saying, I wanted to get back at Natalee's family. Her parents have been making my life tough for 5 years. On January 11th, 2012, Vandersloot pleaded guilty to murdering Flores and was sentenced to 28 years in prison. He never gave information about where Natalee's remains could be found. In June of 2011, marking 6 years after Natalee's disappearance, Natalee's father, Dave Holloway, filed a petition with the Alabama courts to have his daughter declared legally dead. The papers were served on his ex-wife, Beth Twitty, who announced her intentions to oppose the petition. A hearing was held on September 23rd of 2011, at which probate judge Alan King ruled that Dave Holloway had met the requirements for legal presumption of death. And on January 12th, 2012, a second hearing was held, after which Judge King signed the order declaring Natalee Holloway to be dead. While Natalee Holloway's remains have still been yet to be found, her legacy lives on. Her mother, Beth, founded the Natalee Holloway Resource Center to serve as a web-based center for education and crime prevention. The NHRC is not a recovery center, but rather it's an educational hub, providing resources for students and young people around the world to teach them about safety while traveling internationally, self-defense, safety on college campuses, and even introducing young adults to career paths in law enforcement. Their work helps to keep young adults aware and prepared in situations like the one Natalee found herself in Aruba. And they also exist to ensure that no other families have to experience what Natalee's family has gone through since her disappearance. The case of Natalee Holloway continues to perplex Americans and the international world alike. While the investigation may be closed, there's still persistence and hope that she will eventually be found. And American law enforcement, while they may not have been the ones investigating the case directly, it wasn't within their jurisdiction. Their assistance to the Holloway and Twitty families during this investigation, during these searches, really helps to show that even when crime is committed against an American on foreign soil, they will do anything to assist and help justice be served, even if they're not the ones who will be serving the justice. For this month's episode of Law and Disorder, I thank you for listening, and we hope to see you at the precinct once again.
Thanks to Anna Muckenfoos for writing, researching, and sharing today's program, and to Christopher Mitchell, our manager of digital content and strategy for producing. And many thanks to you for listening to this episode of Law and Disorder, a Precinct 444 podcast from the National Law Enforcement Museum. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will join us again for another story of law and disorder. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. And we would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 E Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.